Hey guys, Jonathan here back again with another video. In this video, we're going to learn how to use databases with Flask. Flask does not come with database support. However, it allows you to use various extensions that may enable you to work with the different kinds of databases. And with such extensions, you can be able to create, retrieve, update, and delete data as the needs of your application. In this tool, I'm going to introduce you to a tool called Flask-SQLAlchemy that provides SQLAlchemy support for Flask applications. Now you may ask, what is SQLAlchemy? Well, SQLAlchemy is an object relational mapper, and what it does is to map all instances or all the data within our database tables into objects. Those objects can be represented in our code via classes. So in this series, we're going to be learning how to use Flask with a file-based database called SQLite. So in this video, let's demo that simple application you're going to be building, and by the end of this, you'll learn how to build an application that can create, read, update, and delete. You also learn how to connect to a database and how to send form data to a database. So let's get started. In this video, I have this form set up and it has some data in it. Now, if you'll be able to save this data, the data has been added to the database, so we're having some two entries. However, this is not supposed to happen. Now, let me demonstrate. We can be able to update this. So when you go to the update route, we're having this name. Now, let's say we're adding number 35 here, and let's say Jonathan test. I would also like to update this to Jonathan 35. Let's say I also want to update the age, let's say to 23, and then we save. We're going to have Jonathan being updated just like you see around here. So we can also delete records by saying delete. So which kind of deletes that from the database? So in this video, we're going to be learning how to do all this functionality with Flask-SQLAlchemy. So I'm having these templates already created, so we shall be focusing on the backend code. So I'm going to go to my Visual Studio Code and I have the different templates for this application. So I'm having models.html, which is going to be our first HTML file. And I also have update.html, which is going to be the one that leads us to the update page. So in this video, so without further ado, let's get started building this. So I'm going to go to the Visual Studio Code, and after that, I'm going to create my file that I'm going to call app.py. Now, after that, I'm going to check whether I have Flask-SQLAlchemy installed. So I'm going to open up my terminal, which is bash in this case, and then I say pip install Flask-SQLAlchemy. I also need to install Flask. So when I run this, I am going to see I have them installed. So I have Flask and Flask-SQLAlchemy installed already. So the next thing will be to render my template. So I'm going to come and say from Flask import Flask. Now I'm going to import a Flask class and then create an instance just like we create a normal Flask application. So I'm going to create app is equal to Flask underscore name. Then from that I'll create my root route. So I'm going to say app.route. Now this is going to be our root route at localhost 5000. So we're going to say def to provide a view function. So this is going to be def index, and what it will return. This time we want to render a template. So what we're going to do is to also import render template. So we're going to import render template from Flask. And after that, we're going to create a templates folder right here. So I'm going to say templates. And after creating this template folder, I'm going to move my HTML files. So I'm going to move them and also move this. Now, since we have this, our home page is having this database demo file, which is models.html. So I'll render that. So I'm going to say render template, and I'm going to say that we're going to render models.html. So I'm going to create the other update route. So I'm going to say app.route, and this is going to be slash update. So in this case, we want to update a user. In this case, we're going to use users, and so I'm going to say int id, and then I'll give this also methods, but let's first leave that to that right now. So I'm going to say update, and then I'm going to say pass. So for now, let's focus on how we can be able to create a database and how we can be able to retrieve records. So in this case, when we have Flask-SQLAlchemy installed, we have to create an instance for it within our app. So I'm going to say from Flask-SQLAlchemy, I'm going to import Flask. I'm going to import Flask. I'm going to import actually the SQLAlchemy class. So import the SQLAlchemy class. So after importing the SQLAlchemy class, we're going to create an instance for it for our app. So we're going to say db is equal to SQLAlchemy, then app. So after this, the thing we're going to do is to create a model which is going to represent how our database table is going to be. So we do that by creating a class, then we give it the name of the entity we would like to represent in our class. In this case, we would like to represent user. So in this case, we inherit from db.model. And after that, every database table with Flask-SQLAlchemy has an ID. So we're going to say ID is going to be equal to db.column. So in this, every ID has to be an integer. So it's going to be db.column, db.integer. Now we can also set this as our primary key. So we're going to say primary key is equal to true. Now the next thing we need here is the username email. So we're going to say our username is going to be db.column and db.integer. So we're also going to say that nullable is going to be equal to false. Now in this case, we are creating a column of username that is going to be, it's actually going to be a string. So we're going to specify and say this is going to be a string. Now we also can set the length of the string we want. So we can say that it's going to be a string of length 255. Now you can also create the field for the email. So the email is going to be similar to that of the username. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it here. Now we also need to create, let me first undo that. So we also need to create the age. So I'm going to create the age field by saying age is going to be equal to db.column db.integer. We can set this to nullable is equal to false, meaning that we do not want it to be null. Now we're going to create a data repre function. So I'm going to say def underscore repre. And what this function is going to do is to return string representations of our objects. When you query the database, we shall be querying it using this class, and whenever we shall be querying, we'll be returning string representations of those objects. So we're going to say return. So we're going to use an f string, and in this case, we're going to say user, and we can say username. So we can be able to say that we have an username, an email, an age. The next field that you have forgotten is the gender, so you're also going to include that. So I'm just going to copy the email field and return it since they're all going to be strings. When I paste this, I'm going to change this to gender. However, I may specify that the longest gender should be, let's say, 25 characters. Nullable is equal to false, so it's not going to be, it's going to be null. Now the next thing will be for us to show SQLAlchemy where our database is going to be located. In this case, we're going to use SQLite. SQLite is a database that can be supported within Python, and you do not need to install any drivers or sort. So let's get setting our path to where I want to our database to be. SQLite is a database file, so we may want to create it within our application folder. Now, what I'm going to do is to set the path to our application folder where we're going to put our database. So I'm going to do that with OS. So I'm going to say import OS, and after importing OS, I'm going to create a variable called base.dar that's simply going to point within my application folder. So I'm going to say base.dar is going to be equal to OS dot path dot, so it's going to be dar name, and that's going to be the directory name. So I want the directory name of the real path, like the actual path to all where my file is. So what I'm going to do is to come and say os.path. So I'm going to say os.path dot. So I want the real path to this file I'm coding in right now. So this file is always represented by the variable underscore underscore file. Then I save. So if I am to go down this side and run my app just to see the folder name, so I'm going to say if underscore underscore name is equal to underscore underscore main, move this. So this is going to be, so I'm going to run app.run. I'm going to specify that I want debug equal to true. So when I save and try to run my app, so I'm going to come and say python app.py, and so we're seeing that we're having an error. So that error is coming because we have an update route that does not begin with a forward slash. So I'm going to save. So when I come this side and run the app, hopefully this time is going to run, and we're having errors that are saying that our SQLAlchemy database URI and SQLAlchemy track modifications are not set. Now the SQLAlchemy database URI stands for that specific path to our SQLAlchemy database. For example, you may want to use a Postgres, you may want to use a MySQL database, and in this case we're going to use an SQLite database. Now by default, SQLAlchemy, when you don't set the SQLAlchemy database URI, it sets the path to SQLite in memory. However, we would not like to do this. We would like to create a physical database file. So I'm going to copy this SQLAlchemy database URI. I'm going to copy it. So after copying it, I'm going to come, and the way we set configurations in Flask is by using the app.config dictionary. So it's a dictionary of config variables. So in this case, I'm going to say app.config. So the way we set these config variables is by putting the key. So I'm going to say SQLAlchemy database URI, and then I set it to the database URI I want. Now, if we are to look into the format in which SQLAlchemy does database connection strings, in this case you're having SQLAlchemy, then the address, in this case, is going to be memory. So I'm going to copy this, and after I copy this, I'm going to paste it right here. So I'm going to paste it. So I'm going to put this in curly braces. I'm going to put this in curly braces, and then I'm going to concatenate it to the path to my database. So I'm going to come and say. So what I'm going to do is to add base.dar. Let me first print it for you so that you may be able to see it. So I'm going to say print base.dar. So when I print this, having syntax error, I'm going to first comment this out and come down, then I run this. So when I run this up, we want to see the folder. So we have C Jonathan desktop model. So it's showing the folder in which our project is in. Now we would like to join that with our SQLAlchemy. We want to join that to our database name so that we be able to dictate where our database is going to be. So I'm going to uncomment this, and then I say os.path.join. So what this is going to do is going to join the base.dar, the path, the folder name of our project to the file that you're going to do. So in this case, we're going to say users.db. That is going to be our file name. Now for that, when we save, um, the server is going to restart, and the warning we're going to say is SQLAlchemy track modifications add significant overhead and will be disabled by default. So in this case, what we're being told is this warning should be set to false to be suppressed. So we're going to copy this. So we're going to copy these track modifications, and we're going to copy it. So we're also going to set it in our configuration variable. So we're going to say app.config, and this is going to be, oh, sorry for that. So okay, let me just manually type it. So I'm going to say SQLAlchemy track modifications. In this case, we're going to say equals to false, since we do not want to see that error. So when we save, we are saying that our server is restarting and the errors have been suppressed. And the next thing would be I'm going to first remove this. I'm going to come and remove this print statement. And after that, when I save, we're going to have our server restarting without any warnings. So we have been able to create a database connection string. We've also been able to suppress the warnings in the terminal. We've also created our user model that's going to create a representation of the database table user. However, if we want to change the user's name, the user table name, we may say, if we have the class named as user, we may have our table name named, and we may have our table name named lowercase user. So to suppress this, we may want our table name to have a custom name. So we may say that the table name in this case is going to be equal to. So we may say that the table name is going to be user. So when we save, our server is going to restart, so we have no errors. Now the next thing will be to create our database. So I'm going to stop my server, and I'm going to do this from the Python shell. So I'm going to say Python, and I'm going to import my DB instance as well as my class from the app. So I'm going to say from app import DB, and we're also going to import user. So after I import this, I see no errors. So the thing I'm going to do is to run db.create all. And what this does is to create our database with the tables that we specified within our model classes. So when I say db.create all, it's going to create my database. So I can be able to inspect this. I use a tool called SQLite browser, or DB browser for SQLite. So I'm going to go and open it up. When I open it up, I'm going to open this. So I'm going to close this and open my database. So I'm going to go to coding, my coding folder, and it's actually on the desktop. So I'm going to go to the desktop and then find my models demo. So the file is users. When I open it up, I'm going to have my user table created. So we can see it, even the schema is created here. So we're having the table user with username not null, email not null, gender which is a varchar, and the age which is an integer. So if we browse data, we've been able to create our database with the following tables. And now let's learn how we can be able to create data within our database table. So I'm going to close that. So I'm going to show you how an object relational mapper works. So an object relational mapper works by creating objects that are represented as rows in a table in the database. So to create a new row, we may say that new, let's say new user is going to be equal to user. Then we create a user. So in this case, we're going to create a user with username. Let's say Jonathan, and you may have the email being equal to Jonathan at test.com. Then we also have the age, so we may set the age to 22, and we may also set the gender. So we're going to set the gender to, let's say, male. So we've been able to create our user object. However, creating the user object does not save it to the database. So to save this to the database, we're going to say db.session.add. So we add the newly created user object to the database session. So we're going to say new user, and this does not save it to the database. So we have to say db.session.commit. So this finally adds that to the database. So when you go and check within our SQLite browser and refresh, so we have our user being created with the following credentials. So we're having user with the age of 22, with the email that, and with the username of that. So we have successfully added a user to our database. So to update information about this user, we may query for that specific user. So I'm going to go to a new line and then say, I want to query for user number 1. So I may want to query and say user dot query, then query for, if I want to query for all, I may say user dot query dot all, but in this case I want to filter. Let me say filter by, so I'll say filter by the username equals, let's say, Jonathan. So I may have one user with the name of Jonathan, so I'm going to query that with the name of Jonathan. So I'm going to call dot first. So this returns the first user with the name of Jonathan. So if I say user1, it's going to return user. So they are saying username is not defined. So I'm going to stop this, Control D. And what I'm going to do is to go back here and fix this. So I'm going to say this should actually be self dot username and save. So I'm going to come back to the Python shell. I'm going to from app import b, and also going to import user. And after this, I'm going to create a new user object. So I'm going to say new user. Let's create another user. So it's going to be a user with the username equals to Jonathan. So we're having another user called Jonathan, and we're having their email as, let's say, jobs@test.com. So also going to create the age. Age is going to be equal to, let's say, 23, and we may also say that the gender is equal to male. So we've been able to create the object. So to add it to the database session, we may say db.session.add. So we may say new user, and let's say want to check db.session.commit. So that adds it to our database. So we have 2 entries. So we can add as many entries as we want. So I'm going to add another entry. So I'm going to say user number 3 is going to be equal to user. So in this case, we want to create a user, the username of, let's say, Jerry, and an email of, let's say, Jerry at test.com. So we may also want to say that they have an age of, let me say, 14, and their gender is equal to male. So when save that, we may also save it by saying db.session add. So we will say user 3. So we will say user 3 and db.session.commit. So when we check our database, we have 3 users now. So we're having 2 users with the name of Jonathan and 1 user with the name of Jerry. So when we want to query our database for specific things, we use query sets. So we may make a query for all the users. So we may say that users is equal to, it returns a list of users. So we may say user or user model dot query dot all. So this has to return a list of users. So when you say users, we get a list of users. So we get Jonathan, Jonathan, and Jerry. What if we want to return users whose names are Jonathan, whose usernames are Jonathan? So we may say, let's call this Jonathan. So Jonathan is going to be equal to a query. So you need to say user dot query dot filter by. So in this case, you may specify that you may want to specify by the attribute you would like to filter by with. So I'm going to use a username. Then I specify that the username is going to be Jonathan. So after specifying that the username is going to be Jonathan, and I want a list, so I have to say dot or. Now when I say Jonathan, it's going to return a list of users whose names are Jonathan. So this helps us to return a query set or a set of objects that have a certain attribute about them. Now, if you want to query for a specific, let's say I want to query for a user with that attribute, the first user with that, so I'm going to just call Jonathan, and then I'll just have to say first. So this returns the first object that has the username Jonathan. So we have username Jonathan. Now the way you can access such attributes, the attributes of a certain object, we say Jonathan. Let's say we want to access the username. So we may say Jonathan.username, and this returns Jonathan. So if we want to access the age, we may say Jonathan.age, and this returns the age. So if we want to say Jonathan.gender, this returns the gender as male. So if you want to update this user, we may say that Jonathan dot age is equal to 25, and that updates the age to 25. And if we want to save that, we may say db dot session dot commit. Now we may also want to delete that user. So if we say Jonathan, let's correct this. So say Jonathan.age. Now Jonathan has an age of 25. Previously had an age of 22, which is updated. And if we want to delete a user, we may say db.session.delete. So in this case, we specify the object we would like to delete. So in this case, we want to delete Jonathan. And then after that, this does not permanently delete it. You have to save it to the database. You have to save the changes and commit. So we say db.session.commit. I'm going to save that, and if we query our user model, so we're going to say user.query.all. In this case, we're going to see we have two objects. Now let's go and try to show this on the front end. So I'm going to stop the Python shell by saying Ctrl Z and enter. So I'm going to restart my server by saying Python app.py. Now that we are having our DB created and it has some data, let's go and see how we can be able to retrieve that data and display it via our front end. So we have been able to render models.html, so this has to be a string. So I'm going to correct this by putting it in quotes. And if I save, my server is restarting, which means we don't have any error. So I'm going to go to the browser. I'm going to close this, so go to our localhost 5000, and yeah, we've been able to create this to render this dummy template. However, for now it doesn't have any oh, let's see where the problem is. So okay, so we're having another server running. I'll have to stop this by saying Ctrl C, actually close that. So if I go to my localhost 5000, we're having this template that does not have anything. So it's saying method not allowed because this form is a post form, and when you go to update, it doesn't navigate anywhere. So we are currently working. Now we have to connect this to the database. We have to connect our form to the database. So let's see that in action. So what I'm going to do is to go back to my code in the backend. I'm going to say the first thing I'm going to do is to retrieve the objects that we have in our database on the front end. So I'm going to go to models.html and delete. I'm actually not going to delete it, but let me first query for all the users in the database. So I'm going to say users is going to be equal to user.query.all, and After getting all users, what I have to do is to create a context. So I'm going to create that context, which is going to be a dictionary. Now, what a context helps me to do is to be able to display variables from the back end and show them on the front end. So I'm going to say want to access users through the variable users and to also stand for the users that are queried from the database. Now to pass that context within render.html, what I'll have to do is to just say star star. That will be the context. So if I save this, my server is going to restart. If I refresh, there's nothing much that's going to happen. You see that our database has two objects, 1 and 2. So to see our data being displayed, we're going to go to models.html. Now, since we have our users being displayed via the users variable, we're going to use a for loop in templating. So I'm going to come to the table body right here, and then I'm going to say for, and this is going to be user in users. So then we're going to put this row, and when I save and go back, the front end is going to show us that we have 2 in the database. However, this is not that data. So to access it, we're going to access the attributes for each of the users. So I'll come and use variables. So I'm going to say we're going to get user dot username. So I'm also going to come here and say this is going to be user dot email, and then this is going to be user dot age. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to remove this and add user dot age. So I'm going to also add the gender by saying user dot gender and then save. So when I go back to the front end, I'm going to see that our data has been able to be dynamically displayed on our front end. So we're having Jonathan and Jerry with their attributes: email, username, age, and gender. Now the next thing we're going to do is to see how we can be able to add these entries via the front end. So to do that, we need to go back to the code, and the first thing we need to do is to, since we have our form here, the first thing we have to do is to set the action of the route that is going to be able to send this data to the database. So what we want to do is that when we submit this form, when we add data here to this form and fill it, when we save, this data is going to be shown in the database. So let's see that in action. So I'm going to create a route. So this is going to be to retrieve. This is going to retrieve all database objects. So this is going to retrieve users. I'm going to create a route. So by default, each route has a method of get. So even if we don't specify that, however, if you want specific post method, so I'm going to say app dot route, and then this is going to be users. So I'll say that I want to create methods. This is going to be methods equal to post. So this will be adding the data to the database. So we say def create users. Let's say create user. So what this is going to do is it's going to pick the different fields from the form. It's going to pick data from the different fields to the form and then submit it to the database. Now if we come to our form, what we are interested in is a name, the name attribute of our inputs. So I have username, email, age, and gender. So we are going to get those. So we're going to come and say that the username is going to be equal to the request data, which comes from form. Now I'm going to import request from Flask. So I'm going to say from Flask import request, and I'm going to save. So when I come this side, I am going to come to the post. So this is going to be request.form. So I'm going to get the username from the form, just like that. The same thing is going to happen for the other fields. So we have username, and I'm going to say I'm going to paste this 4 times. So I have this is going to be email. So I'm going to highlight this and press Ctrl D. So I'm going to change this to email. I'm going to do the same for the edge. So I'm going to say this is going to be edge, and I'm going to do the same for the gender. So I'm going to come and replace this with gender. Now we have in the variables for username, email, and age as the data that comes from the front end. Now in this case, let's first print them out. So I'm going to say print. So I'm going to print them by saying I'm going to print an f string that's going to have all of this. So we're going to have username, and we're going to have email, and we're going to have password. So we also have the gender. So in this case, we're going to set the gender and we save. And now after saving this, we're also going to return submitted. We're going to actually just say submitted. Now the next thing will be to set the action on the form with this view function. So what we're going to go is to go to models.html. So we see the form does not have any action. So we're going to say the action in this case is going to be URL4. Sorry for this, URL4. So then you specify the method. In this case, the method is create user. So we're going to say create user. Now let's save this. And when you go back to our database, when you come back to our browser, we're going to fill in some dummy data. So I'm going to fill in some dummy data like age and select a gender, let's say male. And when I submit it, I have password is not defined. Let's see where that error is coming from. So I'm having password, oh, sorry, it's actually supposed to be email, age, and gender. I don't know how I thought about password. So if I save that and come back, so if I resend this, we're going to see that our form has been submitted. So when you come to our console, to our shell, we see that the variables have been logged or they have been printed to the console. Now the next thing will be to create an object using these variables and then saving it to the database. So I'm going to delete this and I'm going to create a variable called new user. So the new user is going to be an instance of the user class, and which has a username which is equal to the username and the email. So in this case, we're going to have the email which is equal to the email, and we're also going to have the age which is going to be age, and then finally we're going to have the gender as the gender from the front end. Now next thing will be to save this object. So I'm going to say db.session.add and then db.session, oh sorry for that, session.commit. So I need to add the new user, so it's going to be the new user. And after this, what you would like to do is to redirect to the home page instead of returning submitted. So I'm going to import a function called redirect from Flask. So I'm going to import redirect. So after importing redirect, I'm going to come where I did this. So I'm having username equals to username. So I forgot putting a comma right here. I'm going to put this on a new line. So I'm going to return redirect, and then I'm also going to use URL4. So I'm going to import that from Flask as well. URL4, then I'll specify the index route. So I'm going to say index. Sorry for this. I'm going to come and write it just inside. So it's going to be index. Now I'm going to run my server, come to my Python, to my shell and run python app.py, and our server is going to run without error. So if I navigate back to my form, I'm going to refresh, and after refreshing I'm going to create some data. So I'm going to create a user called Jimmy, and their email is going to be jimmy123@test.com. So we may say that the age is 32 and the gender is male. So we may save this to the database. So we say add missing one required argument, which is the instance. Now let's see this. So in this case, we forgot to actually put this user instance. So we're going to add this user instance to add and save. So our server is going to restart. So when we refresh and resend this, new use is not defined, so we're going to create this. So in this case, we're adding the new user, not new use. So when I save, my server is going to restart. And after the server restarting, when I resend this data, R is not defined, so still we have this error. And if I save, go back and resend, I have to import URL4. So I'm going to come just up here and import from Flask, import URL4 and save. The server is going to restart. So we're going to have our Jimmy created. So it's going to be created 2 times because we tended to submit the form multiple times, but however we've been able to add this to the database. So the next thing is going to be to delete users and update these users. So to update these users, we're going to go to our update route, which is going to be slightly just here. So to update a user, we'll need to select the particular user we want to update, and the only way we can do that is by basing on their ID. So we shall have a route such as /update/integer ID, the unique identifier of that user. So I'm going to come and pass that ID within the function, and when I come this side, I'm going to select the user and return a 404 error in case that user is not found. So what I'll do is to say a user to update is going to be equal to user dot query dot get or 404. Then I'm going to pass in the ID of that user. Now after getting that user, we also have to get data from the form that is displayed on the front end. Now to render that template, I'm going to come and say, so this has to render a template, so I'm going to say return render template. So this is going to return update.html. So also need a context, so I'm going to pass the context. So I'm going to say context is going to be equal to a dictionary. So in this case, what we need is the user, and this is going to be set to the user to update. So I'm going to pass this within my update.html, say context. So when I save, the server is going to restart without errors, so everything is working as expected. Now the next thing will be to see this in action. So I'm going to go to models.html and I'm going to set the various links to all those. So when I come to update, I'm going to set it to the route. So I'm going to come and say slash update, then slash. In this case, we want the user ID, so I'm going to say user.id, then say slash. So when I save this, I'm going to come and refresh. After refreshing, when I click update, it takes us to the specific user. So in this case, we're having this, but this is dummy data. Let's go back. When you go back, let's say Jimmy. So we're seeing that the information displayed is not for that user, the one that you want to update. So we're going to change that by coming to update.html, and we're going to change the values. So we're going to say that the value of this is going to be, since in the context we passed user, so we're going to access the user variable. Now we're going to say the value in this case is going to be user.username. And the next thing is going to be user.email. So I'm going to come and say user.email. And the next thing is going to be user.age. And the next thing will also be, so we're going to create the first option as the one that we have. So in this case, we're going to say user, or we may also like eliminate the gender, let gender be set 1. So we may say the layer gender, or we may just actually come here and we say disabled, so that someone is not able to change their gender. So when you save this, when you go back to our front end, you can be able to see that the data is dynamically displayed on the front end. So when you press save, let's go back. So we want to set the action for this. Now what we'll do is to say, we're going to say that the action is going to be slash update slash, then we're going to set user.id. Now let's work on this functionality. Now what will happen here is we're having our form with these different values as shown in the front end. What we want to do is that if we change these values and submit, so we have method not allowed simply because it's a get. But what you want is when you update this, when save, that object will be updated like we want. So let's go back to our code and see that in action. So when I come to app.py, I'm going to say that we need methods. So I'm going to say methods is equal to, in this case, we are going to have method get post. So after that, I'm going to come and specify that if you have a post request, this is what is supposed to happen. So I need to come and say if request dot method is equal to post. What we're going to do is we're going to get the data from the front end and set this to the attributes on the object. So what we're going to do is to say that user want to update dot username going to be equal to the username is going to be equal to the data we get from the front end. So it's going to be request dot form dot get, then it's going to be username. The next thing is going to be user to update dot email. It's going to be request dot form dot get. So in this case, we're going to have email. And the next thing is going to be user to update dot age. It's going to be request dot form dot get. So in this case, it's going to be the age. The same thing for the gender, but in this case, we're not going to be able to change the gender. So after this, what we're going to do, let's first check whether the names of our fields are like that. So we have username, email, and age, and then gender. So when I come to app.py, the only thing we shall do is to save this. So I'm going to say db.session.commit. This has to save it to the database. And then we'll need to redirect to the index route. So I'm going to say return redirect. So we're going to redirect to URL for and then index. So I save this and hoping my server is running as expected. Yeah, it's running. So I go back to my front end and refresh. So we're seeing that name post is not defined. So let's see where that error is. If request to method equal to post, this has to be a string. I'm going to correct this by coming and saying put it in quotes and restart my server. So if I go and refresh, so I'm having my form displaying successfully. So if I go and say Jimmy, let's add name Jones. Let's say Jimmy Jones 123 and the age is 36. So when you save this, yeah, it is successfully updating the user with the ID. So when I try to update someone like Jerry, so I'm going to add Jerry Mouse. If I say Jerry Mouse at test.com, let's say the age is 26, and when you save this, we're going to see that Jerry has also been updated, which is beautiful. Now let's go and try to delete. So we're having our delete routes, but currently they are not working. So I'm going to come to my code and create another route. So this route is going to be responsible for deleting. So I'm going to say app.route and app.route. So The route you're going to create in this case is going to be slash delete, and it's going to have a method. And what it's going to do is to just have a method of get. So when you go to that route, we're going to be able to delete. So we're going to say it's going to have a method of get. So in this case, I'm going to create my view function. So it's going to be delete user, and I pass in the ID of the user I want to delete. So I'm going to say I want to delete a user with an integer, the ID. So I'm going to come to delete user and pass in the ID. So delete user with ID. So what I'm going to do in this case is to say the user I want to delete, so user to delete is going to be equal to the user. So I'm going to also do the same thing. So I'm going to come and say I'm just going to come and copy this code and paste it here. So I'm going to paste this code right here, and what it's going to do is to search for the user in the database, or if it's not found, it's going to return a 404 error, not found error. So when we get this, we're going to say db.session dot delete. So this is going to delete that instance. So we're going to say db.session.delete the instance, the user instance, and then we're going to save those changes to the database by saying db.session.commit. Now after this is done, we're going to save, and actually we have to redirect to return an HTTP response. So I'm going to say return redirect. So we're going to return to the index route. So I'm going to return to index. Now I'm going to save, and after saving, our server is going to restart. Now if I go to delete, I'm going to first update these links in my I'm going to update these links in my HTML. So I'm going to come and say this is going to be delete slash user dot id, and then that. So when I save, I'm going to come this side and refresh. So when I delete, so I'm saying that the various objects are being deleted every time we delete this. So now our form is working. So I'm going to try to delete everything and try to re-enter data here. So I'm going to say Harry Potter. So I'm going to say Harry Potter 256. So I'll add the email as Harry Potter, then Harry Potter 256 at test.com. So let me say that he's 100 years and he has a gender of male. So when I save this, it's able to create our entry in the database. So if I update this to, let me say, Harry Potter, and then I also update the email to Harry Potter. So when I save this, we're going to be able to see that our data has been updated. Now let's try to delete this. We're going to delete this by click on the delete, and our data has been deleted. So in this video, we've been able to learn how Flask can be used with databases. For our case, we have used SQLite. However, you can feel free to comment down below if you want me to make videos while using other databases such as Postgres and MySQL. So if you watched through this video and found it interesting, or you learned from it, please like the video. Also free to subscribe to my channel. Feel free to subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. We'll be learning programming in the simplest possible ways. So the source code of this is going to be in the description. Thank you for watching. May God bless you.